Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot, a podcast and newsletter all about how generative AI is changing the media, journalism, and the news. Your hosts are Peter Paschal and John Biggs, two tech journalists and entrepreneurs currently exploring the intersection of journalism and AI. Every week, they'll talk about the latest news in the AI industry with a focus on what it means to report and create content in a world that is rapidly changing.
Hello. What's up, everyone? It's the Media Copilot. It's coming at you midweek because one, it's Thanksgiving week, and two, it has been insane the last few days. I'm sure, as everyone has seen, there has been crazy turmoil at OpenAI. It seems like every 5 minutes there's some new development. Certainly, there is a lot of takes. There's a lot of ramifications of all this stuff at this meltdown at the world leader in AI. And we've got a sort of mini panel here to talk about it. So first, as always, with me is my colleague, John Biggs. Hello, John.
Howdy, howdy.
And joining us today to make sense of the madness is Peter Bittner from The Upgrade. What's up, Peter?
Hey, how's it going, Pete? An honor to be here. Man, there is a lot that is up right now in the air when it comes to OpenAI. Holy crap. Yeah, it's going to take, a while to unpack the events of the last few days, but let's give it our best shot in the time we have here.
Yeah, let me just do a really quick summary, and I'll see if I can do this in a paragraph or less. So basically, the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, who wasn't just the face of the company, he was kind of the face of generative AI as a technology in a lot of ways, was just out of nowhere dismissed from his job. He was fired by the board. And that sort of set off a chain of events that is still going on. So there was the guy who ousted him, who architected this, Ilya Surskyver. I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name, but he is. He sort of created this coup, and there was a lot of narratives. First of all, we don't know exactly what the reasoning was, because all they said was there was a lack of communication. But what happened was within 24 hours, there was pressure from Microsoft and others, Microsoft being the main investor in OpenAI, to bring him back just because of the stability of the whole thing. And so there were these late night negotiations that went on all weekend. It didn't happen. They didn't bring him back. Instead, they used that time, the OpenAI guys, to find another CEO, which ended up being Emmett Shear, the former CEO of Twitch, which is actually the second interim CEO they appointed. First, they tried to appoint someone internally, their CTO, but she essentially joined the folks that wanted Sam back. And now Microsoft has essentially hired Sam, and I didn't even mention Greg Brockman, who is the president of OpenAI, who also threatened to quit with Sam. And
but he did quit
now
with Sam.
He did quit with Sam, and so basically they're going to Microsoft, but things are still ongoing because now the staff has openly revolted. Now the OpenAI employees only number about 750 or so. And virtually all of them have said, we're ditching OpenAI if the board doesn't resign and they don't bring Sam back. And just in the last hour, Microsoft CTO tweeted. Now I'm just going to read the tweet from Kevin Scott. And this was like less than an hour ago. He says, "To my partners at OpenAI, we have seen your petition and appreciate your desire potentially to join Sam Altman at Microsoft's new AI research lab. Know that if needed, you have a role at Microsoft that matches your compensation and advances our collective mission." So if there was any question now, like, can Microsoft even take on these presumably very highly paid AI engineers and staffers, it seems like that they completely willing to write that check. So balls in your court, OpenAI board. And again, this is all, developing rapidly. There's a lot of things happening. There's probably more reporters on this story now than has ever been assigned to a story in tech. So I'm sure we'll get more details. But I think everyone's just thinking of like, well, how does this affect me as a ChatGPT user, of which there are 100 million, or at least were before Friday, of this service. They're like 100 million weekly users is what they said at their dev day. So we're kind of desperately trying to figure out like what this is going to mean for the space and those users. Peter, what's your initial take on all this?
Man, so there's blood in the water. It's really up in the air when it comes to how things are going to shake out. Hopefully we'll know by the end of the week, what the fate of this, market leader OpenAI will be. But, I saw Mark Benioff tweeting, hey, OpenAI employees, this was last night, Monday night, the 20th of November.
Yeah.
Why don't you consider coming over to Salesforce and join us? So, I mean, it is a total cluster. Anything's possible. There's also been reports that, the board of OpenAI reached out to Anthropic about a potential merger, which is also just mind-blowing considering, the history of those two organizations as well, right? Anthropic founders coming directly from, the C-suite at OpenAI. Their spinoff was really focused on sort of ethics and AI safety, right? And that's kind of their brand at Anthropic. But man, there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of with this story.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the safety thing, because we were talking about this a little bit last night. And John, you had a good take on like what the sort of fundamentals of this are. And I feel like they're at heart of why this all got going is that there is this sort of very real philosophical divide, even within OpenAI, the leadership there between the board and Sam and everyone else, between sort of two approaches. And that's sort of why they have such a weird organizational structure is because of that divide, and they didn't really want to function like a normal Silicon Valley company. But it seems to me what we're seeing now is just how incompatible that idea is with like sort of maybe the ethos of Silicon Valley. I don't know. Give me your sort of summary of what that divide is and your take on how it affected things playing out this way.
So the way this shakes out, this is similar to Red Hat, to the open source world, where you have a
explain that just in case anyone doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. You have a nonprofit side, which is basically the code, the open source code that anybody can download. So in the case of Linux, for example, you had Linus Torvalds, who wrote an operating system, who said, "Hey, if anybody wants this operating system, come grab it. You can get it for free." Then you had a company like Red Hat that came along and said, "We're going to fix this operating system to a degree. We're going to improve it, and we're going to simultaneously give it away and sell services behind it." We can also go deep into OS X, for example, or Mac OS, I guess you would call it now. For Apple, that's a really weird hybrid thing where they basically took an open source thing and built up stuff on top of it, accretions of other code on top of it to turn it into something completely closed. So there are three ways to do this. There's basically just a small startup that you have your intellectual property, you have a moat, you have complete control over it. Nobody gets to see your source code. Then there's the open source model, which could also have a commercial model, which is exactly what OpenAI had. And the open source model is very, very I guess you could say it's very benevolent. They're trying to be benevolent, and which is almost impossible in Silicon Valley. And then you have kind of the closed source where you take something and you close it up, and you don't allow anyone to access it after the fact, which is what Apple did. So what we're seeing right now is OpenAI has a vision of an open artificial intelligence world where nobody has control over a single model, where all the biases are out in the open, where we have complete control. In the same way that we had the internet. I mean, technically the internet's supposed to be wide open for everybody. In practice, it costs a lot of money to get on the internet, and it costs a lot of money to maintain the internet, et cetera. So somebody has to pay that. Therefore, we have commercial aspects of it. But if we're going to
but then this is sort of also layered on top of I feel like a go fast, go slow philosophical divide in AI too, right? Which they're trying to plug that, I think, the middle model you described about open source and saying like, okay, this is a good model to sort of add a little bit of a throttle to the whole idea of the industry. So it's like there's all this doomsayer stuff, and I don't know if I think it's a little too simplistic to say it's doomsayers and say, is AI going to kill us all? Is AI going to save us all? I don't think that's too simplistic, but I do think the idea was like, okay, we can't just grow, move fast and break things. We need essentially a valve, and the board saw themselves as this valve. And if you look at sort of the comments from the guy and everything, I think they feel like that's what their duty was. It wasn't to make sure OpenAI was successful. It wasn't to make sure like it thrived and competed in a marketplace. It was that, are we developing AGI, artificial general intelligence, in a responsible way? And it sort of manifested into this crazy boardroom fight because of just the way companies in Silicon Valley are run.
I think that's disingenuous on their part. I think there's a certain amount of like patriarchal kind of like, well, we know what's best for you. And this happens every single time we have like a big change. I remember the Clue Train manifesto with like Scoble and those guys were arguing that like the internet's got to be free and open, all this other stuff. And yeah, it's going to be free and open, but it's definitely not going to be in the way that anybody can control. That's the biggest thing. The horse is out of the barn, as it were, with this whole thing. Are people going to use it for good? Absolutely. Are people going to use it for bad? Absolutely. And these people aren't the arbiters of good taste or technological importance, et cetera, et cetera. And that's mean to say, but it's true.
So, like I was saying at the beginning, I think there's a lot of, since Friday, there's been a lot of question marks on the future of this company and its technology. And I've never seen this before, how someone was far and away the market leader one day and is now so in limbo, and the future is so in question that you really don't even know if their products are going to exist in a month in the same way. And yes, they have their engineers sort of keeping the lights on, making sure the service runs. But if you just think about the reputational damage they've suffering, and I wrote about this the other day, like people have to be thinking about diversifying their toolkits in terms of what they're using day to day. And now, first of all, there's also a story in the information that, and by the way, credit to that publication for getting scoop after scoop. I mean, there's a lot of scoops that are being had and a lot of breaking news, but the information is really going all out. And apparently some of the bigger customers of OpenAI are now starting to go like, yeah, we're if this gets worse, we're basically going to Anthropic and maybe even Google. And I just, how could this happen? Like, I feel like suddenly everyone just realizes how young, vulnerable, and portable these services are, right? Like, it's not like you have vendor lock-in in the same way that Apple's built up an ecosystem over a couple of decades almost, right? It's pretty easy to just say, okay, I'm going to choose, instead of GPT-4 on my drop down, I'll just, let's do Claude, whatever that is, okay, boom, now we're going to do this. Peter,
well, I mean, arguably,
what do you see?
Yeah, go.
I think that, it's crazy for consumers, whether they're enterprise or individual users, would not be looking at alternatives right now and really thinking critically about, some of the ways that they can hedge against this, because we're realizing just how vulnerable, OpenAI's entire lead in this AI race, was, and how thin the margins were. Because you're absolutely right. That, these algorithms, there are, not just 2 or 3, right? It's not just even, OpenAI, ChatGPT, 4 Turbo versus Cloud 2 versus Llama 2. Like, there are hundreds, right, of open source, algorithms that are also going to be really worth considering, even for individual users, once there's, some better interfaces for them. And this is suddenly, I think, a watershed moment in the industry for all types of users, where they're suddenly, instead of having this narrow, myopic view of, ChatGPT being the product, they are forced to have a wider perspective and aperture on this. And it's going to be a big, big shift in the market, regardless of whether OpenAI survives this next week or not, right?
John, what do you think? I mean, you're a pro at sort of downloading these models and integrating them into tools, and you already know how easy it is to, jump between them depending on whatever you're building. I think most casual users are like thinking, well, it's just a default. You probably even have the widget on your iPhone for ChatGPT if you're using it, right? But I think even people who are doing that are now sort of like, what else is out there? Maybe I heard of this Google Bard thing. Let me try that.
Well, look, I'm in the position where I understand how to use the APIs, how to access all this stuff, and I also understand that that the API could get yanked at any time. When Twitter got sold, for example, I had a couple bots running that were basically reposting my stories, and now they're dead, and there's no real explanation of how or why or what I need to do to fix them. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to let it sit there. But if I'm building a business, who am I going to build it on? And I'm going to argue fairly vociferously that I'm going to build it on the open source model. I'm going to build it on an OpenAI. Are they going to have the same amount of cash to develop the product, to do the training, to do all the work associated with that? I don't know, but if Microsoft one day says, "Hey, you can't use our model to write news stories," or I don't know, use our model to make videos, then a lot of people are going to be out of first off, a lot of businesses are going to go under because they've just moded an entire world, and then I don't know, it's kind of messy. So yeah, I would love to have an open source model. I would love to have an open source AI model that I could use, that anybody can use. Do I trust OpenAI with the keys to my kingdom? No, I don't trust anybody with those. But I'd much rather depend on the kind of like the naive, bright-eyed open source kids who actually built most of computing as we know it today. I mean, we're all using stuff that was open source in the first place. Almost every single technology that we're using right now is wildly open source, and it's wildly open. I don't trust Microsoft with my startup, right?
So I'm glad you opened the door on thinking about what happens next, on what's Microsoft going to do and whatever. But in the short term, the tweet I was reading earlier seems to be, again, yet another strong indicator, in my view, that Microsoft kind of doesn't want to acqui-hire all of OpenAI. I think they're basically saying that they will, so that the board will resign and they can return to something a little closer to status quo. Because if they suddenly have essentially acquired OpenAI and are starting to build that technology in-house, that opens up a bunch of headaches for them. And the Microsoft has been, under the antitrust microscope for going on like 2 or 3 decades at this point. And it's, once they are the leader, presumably in the AI field as well, and then suddenly are a massive arbiter here. And then, we just had the executive order and all these things that are presumably going to become law of, you got to show us your red team stuff. And if you go over this compute stuff, we're going to be all up in your business there in Redmond. So they don't really want that. I think they really like the arm's length relationship they have with OpenAI as the primary investor, and the thing they really want out of this is just a major say in governance. Like, there's absolutely no way, and I'm sure Altman and everyone supports this, is that there's no way, if the board resigns, that when they reform, that Microsoft doesn't have a board seat, if not more than one, and some serious input into how that company is run. I mean, that seems like the desired output. I feel like everyone's pushing for that. Will that happen? I don't know enough about the politics involved, and it's been so crazy lately. Like, I even saw a joke headline of the board asking Elizabeth Holmes if she wanted to be CEO, which things are so crazy. I thought, could that be true?
Well, she'd have to get out of jail first.
Right, exactly.
Microsoft could bail her out, but yeah, I mean, I've seen some takes that this is a coup. Microsoft is taking advantage of this opportunity and going to port over all these employees, for basically no cost. I mean, that's not true. This is not what Satya Nadella wanted. And if that were to happen, their stake, 49%, right, in OpenAI, at least their corporate entity, would basically go down the tubes and be worthless. So, I mean, it would be roughly $40 billion acquisition
and
of
then,
those
and also
700
then
employees. Come on.
the ownership of its technology becomes a big question mark, right? Like if OpenAI essentially collapses and everyone goes to Microsoft, but OpenAI still has whatever IP around all that tech, like that's worth something, and maybe that doesn't go to Microsoft, and Microsoft has to sort of start from scratch on building new models, which take a while. Like I'm sure the talent is unprecedented, and I'm sure it would take not as long as before. But what if, like, I mean, is it theoretically possible that if OpenAI implodes, that it gets bought up by Anthropic or someone, or like I don't know.
I don't think we ever end up in that situation. I don't think OpenAI. So by definition, what we're talking about is the open source aspect of and what Microsoft did is they donated for all intents and purposes 49 billion or whatever into the company, or the 49% of the company to
Right, it was
themselves.
like 11 billion.
And yeah, that's exactly the same as the Red Hat situation. They said, "Hey, you guys are going to do amazing work. You guys are going to make display drivers, and you're going to make sure that my keyboard, when you press the letter Q, it types a Q on the screen. Also, the good stuff for everybody in the world to use." And obviously, Microsoft was anti-open source for decades, up until they got super open source, up until Satya Nadella actually. So they've basically bought it. They're covered on both ends. If they have all this talent that can build out the commercial aspects of this stuff without having control, they're super happy. And if they can also be part of the conversation when it comes to the zealots who are literally going to be sitting there and saying, "I don't want to use this Microsoft garbage. I'm only going to use the pride and the pure blood kind of like the anti-muggle magic from OpenAI." They're winning in both. We're winning in both camps, and this is very. There's a lot of this effective altruism stuff, a lot of this doomer stuff that is associated with what we're talking about here.
Effective accelerationism, right?
Yeah,
which is kind of part of the divide here, because that's like the Altman perspective is like it's also shared by Mark Andreessen and stuff.
Yeah,
in his tech manifesto.
But that's
just
fun.
Go faster.
Yeah, that's fun, and that in fact that works. I mean, we've been going fast and fast and fast for the past 20 years, and it's not like anything really exploded. We're still driving around in cars that are run on gasoline.
Tristan Harris would probably disagree with you. Social media may have not turned out as good as we.
Yeah, but we would have figured something out. We would have figured out how to like send vinyls to each other that would just drive each other crazy, something like that. I don't know.
So, okay. Have we played out the scenarios? Like, I think you're basically right. Like, I think it would be highly unlikely if OpenAI ended up being a complete shell of itself, like essentially a holding company of IP that becomes a thing people bid on and everyone goes to Microsoft. Even though I'd say the possibility of that is non-zero now, even though I would have said on Thursday last week, there's no way that happens. But I do think there is some version of this where both companies continue, and either OpenAI, no matter what happens, I think OpenAI is a reduced version of itself. Because even if the perfect scenario happens, the board completely resigns, perfect in the sense like for Microsoft and Altman and not so much for the board. Like, so they all go back to OpenAI. It's like, whoo, that was crazy, right, guys? All right, let's go back to work. And Microsoft's awesome. This is great. We have our board seats, and we're going to make sure that never happens again. Still, like what we said a little earlier, like everyone is going to be a little bit, oh, okay, all right. Like that, just reputationally, it's going to be diminished. And I feel like that's sort of where we're going with this. So I also feel like if Google, if Anthropic, if everyone else who is like a major player in this space, or even a minor player, isn't now calling their whole staff and like, we are working through Thanksgiving weekend. We are go, because, someone made the god bleed. Basically, the god tripped and is now has hit its head. Like, we need to go, and we need to go now. And I think we're going to see, just if you thought, this was a fast period of AI announcements, like watch out in a couple of months. Like, Google Gemini is going to level things up. There's just going to be a host of people just going for it because they're, that's just everything just seems so clear now that the industry's young and, the God is vulnerable.
Well, it opened the way to a potential a second place person now has the opportunity to become first place potentially. I don't think this is as wild as we make it out to be, because I think that the first place is always going to be first place, especially in hearts and minds.
I mean, it's not so much getting first place. It's like where there was one, it's like the pie chart, right? The pie chart now is like 2/3 OpenAI, 1/3. I mean, I don't know what it really is in terms of market share, but now I think it's like, oh, that pie chart's going to go down to, maybe half or less, and then everyone else gets more of the pie. So will someone overtake OpenAI? I mean, it's possible, but I think more likely they'll just get closer and closer, at least in the short term.
It really depends on what happens with the employees, right? I mean, where they end up.
Probably not Salesforce, judging by the number of people dunking on Benioff.
Yeah, definitely not Salesforce, it seems, right? There was an instant knee-jerk reaction from employees saying, stay out of this.
And not to overread into some clever tweets, but it just to seem like kind of a desperate thing that everyone wanted to dunk on. I mean, there might be one or two developers at OpenAI who kind of want a quieter life and don't really want to work on AGI and just want to build things into spreadsheets. I mean, there's probably a couple. Why not? That'd be a good gig, and you can do that for a while and retire. But most of them, I think, are with Sam.
Yeah,
guys, why don't we let's go over what we think are the main takeaways here. So first of all, I think the first takeaway is that this is not over by a long shot. That's going to keep playing out. It might even play out over Thanksgiving weekend and beyond in terms of what they're going to work out, because the board does not seem like it is moving on this. They definitely want some kind of graceful exit if they're going to acquiesce to the demand that they resign. I just don't see what form that takes. Their names are everywhere. It's just one of these things that's so high profile that I don't know if you can have a graceful exit now.
Right. I mean, they're being threatened with legal action by their investors, right? Multiple reports out. Yeah, Reuters. Clearly, there is a lot of concern. And there's no graceful exit for the board. Absolutely not. Everyone has, something on their face here. It's messy.
Yeah, it's bad. And I feel like I think it was Aaron Levy who was tweeting about how did the board not think even one step ahead, let alone three? How did you not think this would just be incredibly damaging? And again, I have to keep going back to I think they really thought their mission wasn't to have a successful company. I think they really kind of thought on some level they were doing their job by doing this. And maybe they were.
I mean, if you look at sort of the structure, right, legally of OpenAI, it's bizarre, right? It's not totally unprecedented, but having a board that considers its fiduciary responsibility not to investors or shareholders, but to humanity. I mean, that's obviously going to create a misalignment of interests here, which is shown to be really a key factor in this whole unraveling. But it seems like there's a clear sort of need to figure out how we can put some people with actual financial interests and shareholders. Even Sam Altman famously has no shares in OpenAI. I mean, that's bizarre. But obviously we need some sort of middle ground to be able to have a real clear sort of balance of safety versus commercial interest with this technology that has potential for incredible benefits and harms for society. So it's tricky, right? But I think that clearly we're learning of the shortcomings of their sort of hybrid model here, and how this schism really was exploited.
Yeah, the analogy I'd make is they got so good at building this robot that can run really fast, but the board, in their mind, thought, "Oh wait, we're heading right toward a cliff," and thinking that whether that's the AGI being a threat or whatever, and then just decided to shoot itself in the leg.
That would suggest. I think what you're really saying is that is that we built a robot that can run really fast, and we all got on top of the robot, and the robot was running really fast towards the cliff, and the only way to stop the robot was, okay, there was two ways to stop the robot. There's one way is to like build a lot of other cooler robots to stop the robot that's in front of us, or we just shoot the robot in the leg. I think that's the best way to do it, because
Right.
in terms of like trolley problem kind of situation, the robot was going to kill us all if we kept on going the same way, which is also kind of, again, I'm gonna use this term because I think it's a little naive, and I think it's a little paternalistic on their part to say that the world can't handle this magic that they're about to unleash on it.
Yeah.
There is
Well,
precedent.
also everybody else is building
is
robots heading toward that cliff.
Yeah, exactly. But there's precedent for us being super stupid about new technologies. I mean, social media, for example, was the biggest thing. But a lot of that stuff was a bug, not a feature, I guess you could say, that kind of got fixed. And every new technology has to change our brain chemistry in some way.
Well, what I think, I'm just going to keep going with this analogy, but like, because I like the idea, we should get like Mid-Journey to draw a robot running toward a cliff for us, so we can use that as the thumbnail for this story. But it seems to me like there's a lack of imagination on the board's part. It's like, oh, we have to shoot the robot in the cliff, but like to your point, well, why don't we just build a fleet of robots, more robots to sort of slow it down? Or hey, how about this? Let's build some wings, and then it'll be all good, And I think those are kind of the things that, and I don't want to go too far into this, but it might be fun sci-fi fodder, which the thing Altman said a couple weeks ago or so about, there's only been like 4 real breakthroughs in OpenAI's history, and one happened a couple weeks ago. And I think if you made the sci-fi movie a few years from now of what happened, like that was the thing that freaked everyone out and no one could talk about it, because it was like the robot is we're keeping it in its little robot prison, but it's going to come out and it's like basically they made Skynet. And so, in the sci-fi version, people come from the future to fire Sam Altman or persuade the board to do it. And it's all like this crazy adventure. But it does feel like, there's this thing beyond business and beyond all the valley politics that is an X factor here.
You bring up a great point, which is we don't know exactly what the core sort of conflict was about when it comes to, Sam's dismissal. It's still totally unknown, right? It's a black box and leaves a lot to the imagination, to your point, right? I mean, it's not even an elephant in the room. Like it's, just totally
invisible elephant.
Mystery box. Yeah. What was sort of developed, and we're also kind of assuming that this miscommunication or lack of candor, right, between Altman and the board, was principally surrounding safety and ethics. A lot of the other statements that have come out of OpenAI since then are kind of trying to push back on that, right, and including the one from the interim CEO. Former Twitch executive and co-founder, but it's really anyone's guess at this point. The reporting will tell, right? The truth will come out.
Yeah. So another takeaway, just to sort of get a few more, Microsoft, I think, is coming out as a winner in this, but not necessarily as big a winner as a lot of people were saying yesterday. Like they're going to get some more say in what happens over AI one way or the other. So I think, in the long term, that's going to benefit them. The thing is, things could still go south. There is like we went. It's very very unlikely, but like we say, further away from zero than it was a few days ago. Of like the whole thing just being scrapped and essentially OpenAI becoming some kind of shell of what it used to be. I don't think that's likely, but it's again more likely than it used to be. It's still early in AI. That's a huge reminder to everyone. Things can change. It's just software, and everyone is racing to get amazing at it. And there's, as much as they couldn't even get their platform off the ground with their new GPTs and stuff before this happened. So, things might look very, very different a year from now. And could have looked very different even without this. It's just kind of a reminder about how sort of vulnerable everyone is in this space. And I have like one very media-centric takeaway from this, as I'm kind of stealing this from John Constantine on LinkedIn. But Friday news dumps just don't work. Don't even try. Like, especially with anything big. Like they tried to do, I don't know if they were conscious of, let's do this on a Friday and people won't notice or reporters won't doggedly pursue it. Oh, come on. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it just doesn't work. So the thing is, though, the second lesson from that, I would say, is that once something like this happens, to like some huge news in your beat, everyone else in the field should dump all their bad news, because it's just going to get like lost in this crazy huge story. So yeah, that's a good takeaway. You know, the secondary effect of the media blitz. What else, guys? What are the other takeaways?
You know, it's funny, Pete, that you mentioned that, right, about everyone else should pull out their bad news, because I think recently one of the major, you know, automated car companies dumped their CEO, right? Was it Cruise? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's Cruise. Yeah,
was going through this, you know, major conflict and sort of lack of, you know, trust and transparency with state of California and regulatory bodies there. You know, they're totally taking advantage of the air cover they have right now. And, you know, it's a small little box if you look at the New York Times text section compared to the massive, you know, photo of Altman. Whereas that would be, you know, a week's worth of headlines, you know.
Oh, we'd be seeing think pieces about the state of self-driving cars and like what I think never deliver on the promise, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be tons of that.
I think the reason why we're not seeing it is because the state of self-driving cars is pretty precarious. It's not like we're seeing the technology. We're not able to like chat with our car, right? No, not the world really doesn't know that it's any good. It's one of those technologies that's just been burbling in the background, kind of like 3D printing a couple years ago. Everybody's like, oh, everybody's going to have a 3D printer on their desk or whatever, and it was kind of burbling, and then disappeared. I think 3D car, no, 3D printed cars. AI cars are going to come all at once. AI trucks are coming all at once. They're just going to pop up on the roads. They're going to be driving around. We're going to be completely blindsided by the fact that they exist and that there's like truck drivers driving around in them, and it's going to be crazy. But it's going to be completely different from like OpenAI kind of situation, because not everybody's going to have access to them at first, but when they do, then it's a whole different story.
Cool. And again, I think the final takeaway, the one that we really want to emphasize, is that competitors are really salivating at this, and at that, you'll probably see a lot of services, but generally, like, there are competitors. If you weren't sure, if you're just, you know, or you were always defaulting to ChatGPT, I mean, this is a really good time and good reason to explore other tools and see what works. And yeah, maybe everything goes well and everything go back to normal and GPT-5 gets released soon or at some point and they still maintain that lead. Sure, that's great, but you will be well served by seeing what else is out there for the next little while.
Yeah, and I would also add, by backing up, you know, some of your chat data and prompts that you've been, you know,
right.
putting them all in to, you know, ChatGPT. Go and use, you know, there's some Chrome extensions for screen capturing that will export it as a PDF. You don't have to go and copy and paste everything bit by bit, right? But find your greatest hits if you go back through your chat history there and back them up, right? Both inputs and outputs. It's wise to do that, especially the ones that are, you know, most useful to you in your everyday professional life, which will be a lot, right? But save those. You might want them for Claude 2 or Llama 2 or whatever, but don't lose, you know, some of your own, you know, knowledge and curation, right? If something happens, like, you know, the plug gets pulled, because, yeah, who knows?
How's the SEO on how to back up your ChatGPT data doing? It's probably pretty good. All right, guys. This has been great. Peter, thanks for joining. And, you know, be careful out there when you're using the AI.
Be careful, yeah, because we're going to be riding the back of a robot heading towards a cliff, and we eventually have to shoot its legs out with a shotgun, and we have to figure out where to buy that shotgun.
Yeah, man. It's going to be a wild one, guys. I hope you're able to get some sleep and enjoy some of the holidays, over the next week here. But Pete, John, thanks so much for having me on. This has been a blast. Hope to do it again.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. You have been listening to the Media Copilot with the upgrade. You can, of course, subscribe to the Media Copilot at mediacopilot.substack.com. Peter, how can people get your fine newsletter?
Sure. Go to theupgrade.ai. So THE upgrade.ai to check out my newsletter as well. Both have some awesome scoops and takes, and I recommend subscribing to both.
All right, folks, that'll do it for us. We'll see you in the future.